He dismissed my handshake with a cold, deliberate stare. But what Mr. Sterling didn't know was that I hadn't offered my hand for a greeting. I'd offered it to sign the final papers on his life's work. The glass conference room felt like an icebox, perfectly calibrated, I suppose, to match the atmosphere Mr. Sterling had cultivated in this company for the last 2 decades. I'd rehearsed this pitch until the numbers were tattooed onto my eyelids. This wasn't just a proposal, it was a lifeline for Sterling Corp, hemorrhaging value faster than a punctured oil tanker. I was Sarah Jenkins, and I had brought the cure. I finished, the silence hanging heavy, punctuated only by the aggressive hum of the HVAC system. I could feel the sweat prickling under my collar. Sterling. A man whose silver hair and tailored suit screamed old money from across a football field didn't clap. He didn't even nod. He just steepled his fingers, his pale blue eyes assessing me like a slightly defective piece of machinery. "Miss Jenkins," he began, his voice a dry rasp that seemed to grate on the polished mahogany table. "Your projections are aggressive, unnecessarily aggressive, if you ask me. We prefer steady, predictable growth here, not the whirlwind you seem to be peddling." My stomach tightened. This was the standard deflection. "Mr. Sterling, with respect, steady growth is how you end up irrelevant. The market has shifted. Your current infrastructure is brittle. My integration strategy solidifies your core assets while pivoting into the emerging sectors you're currently ignoring. Look at slide 42. The Q4 projections under my oversight are conservative, yet still show a 30% uptick in actionable revenue within 18 months. Across the table, his 2 longtime VPs exchanged nervous glances. They knew I was right. Everyone knew, except perhaps the man at the head of the table who thought the world stopped turning in 1998. "Sarah, is it?" Sterling cut in, leaning back, the movement slow and deliberate. He didn't even bother using my full professional title, just my first name, stripped of any courtesy. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but sometimes young professionals forget that business is built on relationships, not just algorithms." I felt the familiar, low burn of anger that I had learned, over years of navigating these sterile halls, to keep bottled tightly. I rose smoothly, extending my hand across the expanse of the table. It was a gesture of finality, a professional closing signal. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Sterling. I hope you'll review the full prospectus tonight. My team is ready to move at dawn." My hand hovered there. My palm was open, waiting for the firm, respectful grip that acknowledges a professional engagement, even if the deal isn't done. He didn't move. His eyes flicked down to my hand, a dark hand raised in offering, and then snapped back up to my face, holding my gaze for a beat too long, a beat filled with undisguised dismissal. He didn't even offer the cursory pat or the stiff finger touch some executives resorted to. He simply looked past my hand, as if it were a smudge on the expensive leather chair beside me. "We'll be in touch," he said, finally breaking eye contact to stare blankly at the wall behind me. He made no move to stand, essentially dismissing me while still seated. I retracted my hand slowly, the skin tingling where his should have been. It wasn't just ignoring the gesture. It was a deliberate, calculated slight. It was the visual equivalent of slamming the door in my face. For a split second, the professional mask almost slipped. I felt the rage boil up. The years of being overlooked, patronized, and now this blatant disrespect shown not just to me, but to the billions I was trying to save. I gave a tight, almost imperceptible nod, turned on my heel, and walked out, every step echoing my silent vow. I didn't bother saying goodbye to the VPs. I grabbed my briefcase and headed straight for the elevator, punching the button for the lobby with unnecessary force. The ride down was agonizingly slow. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying across the screen, bypassing secured firewalls with practiced ease. I wasn't just checking emails, I was initiating protocol chimera. "Confirm asset transfer readiness," I muttered into the phone, keeping my voice low. A calm, synthesized voice responded instantly through my earpiece. "Initiating transfer sequence. All necessary legal frameworks are pre-signed and notarized. Required capital reserves confirmed and ready to deploy. Phase 1 completion window. 6 hours. I leaned my head against the cool metal wall of the elevator, closing my eyes. The gesture had stung deeper than he could possibly imagine. Sterling had looked at me, Sarah Jenkins, and seen nothing worth acknowledging. He had treated my expertise like cheap street noise. Fine. If he wanted to play a game of power and ownership, I would show him what real control looked like. I wasn't just proposing a merger. I had spent the last 9 months structuring a hostile takeover so meticulously, so quietly, that not even Sterling's razor-sharp chief legal officer had caught the whisper of it. The elevator doors finally opened onto the marble expanse of the lobby. I walked out into the dazzling midday sun, the city air feeling suddenly charged. I pulled my coat tighter, a cold smile touching my lips. The next morning, I was back in my own sleek, modern downtown office. My assistant, Mark, knocked softly. "Come in, Mark." He entered looking unusually pale, holding a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper, the kind used for high-level corporate notices. He didn't speak. He just pushed the paper toward me across the desk. I picked it up. It was an emergency notice from the Sterling Corp Board of Directors, hastily called in the pre-dawn hours. My eyes scanned the dense legal jargon until they landed on the bolded paragraph. It announced the immediate resignation of 4 long-standing members of the board, citing unforeseen personal circumstances, and simultaneously reported a massive emergency buy-in of outstanding common stock, effectively diluting the control of the founding family overnight. My breath hitched, not from shock, I knew the plan, but from the sheer, brutal speed of it. The final line hit me like a physical blow. Effective immediately, the controlling interest of Sterling Corp is vested in a new majority shareholder group, spearheaded by an unprecedented acquisition of Class A voting shares, resulting in 80% ownership control. I looked up at Mark, whose eyes were wide with stunned comprehension. "Mark, who is the new majority shareholder?" He swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the document. "Miss Jenkins. That information is sealed under an emergency court order, but the rumor filtering down from the trading floor is, it's a holding company, a newly formed shell corporation." He paused, leaning in slightly, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "And according to the SEC filings released 5 minutes ago, the sole director and principal officer of that holding company is you." I stood up, walking around the desk until I could see the city skyline, the towering glass monument of Sterling Corp, visible just a few blocks away. He had ignored my handshake yesterday. He had looked right through me. The irony was almost too sweet to taste. I had the final board meeting scheduled for 2 p.m. today, the one where I was supposed to be begging for a small consulting contract. Now, I owned the building. I picked up my private line, dialing the direct, unlisted number for Mr. Sterling's office, which I had acquired months ago during my due diligence. It rang once, twice. Then a frazzled secretary answered. "Mr. Sterling's office. Please hold for Mr. Sterling." A moment later, his voice came through, tight and laced with panic I hadn't heard yesterday. "Who is this? This line is private." I leaned toward the receiver, my voice dropping to a near whisper, the calmest I had ever sounded. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling. This is Sarah Jenkins. I believe we have a 2 p.m. meeting scheduled. Shall we keep it? I have the revised agenda ready for your review." There was a long, agonizing silence on the line. I could hear the faint, frantic rustling of papers in the background of his office, the sound of a man whose world had just imploded, realizing he was holding the detonator to his own ruin. "Jenkins," he finally choked out, the dignity completely gone, replaced by a raw, ugly fear. "What in God's name have you done?" I allowed myself a small, purely internal sigh of satisfaction. "I've done exactly what I told you I would do, Mr. Sterling. I stabilized your assets. I just chose a more permanent role in the stabilization process. You see, you didn't just ignore my handshake yesterday. You dismissed the future. And when you dismiss the future, Mr. Sterling, the future tends to buy you out. This is illegal. This is corporate raiding. I will call my lawyers. I will have the SEC on you before lunch." His voice cracked on the final word. It was the desperate bluff of a cornered animal. "Feel free," I replied smoothly. My legal team has been waiting for that call since the first tranche of shares cleared escrow at 4:01 a.m. Every move we made was perfectly legal, meticulously documented, and, crucially, approved by the very independent shareholders you've managed to alienate over the last 5 years. They were just waiting for someone credible, someone who actually understood the next decade, to step up with the capital. That someone, Mr. Sterling, was me. I walked over to the massive window overlooking the city. The Sterling Court building looked small from this vantage point, almost quaint. As for the lawyers, I continued, watching a tiny helicopter zip past, they'll be busy reviewing the severance packages, yours being the first one on the desk. Severance? He sputtered. I founded this company. I built this empire. And now you're retired from managing it, I corrected him, my voice hardening just enough to let him know I wasn't negotiating. Look, I didn't come here to gloat, though I admit the view from up here is spectacular. I came here to be professional. We have a transition to manage. You have 1 hour to clear your personal effects and vacate the premises before security locks down your access codes. Your pension remains untouched provided you sign the non-disclosure agreement regarding your oversight failures. The silence stretched again. This time it was heavier, filled with the weight of defeat. I could almost picture him slumped over his opulent desk, the massive oak surface now mocking him. And what about the board meeting? He finally whispered. What happens at 2 o'clock? At 2 o'clock, I said, stepping back from the window, the adrenaline finally beginning to recede, leaving a cold, focused energy in its place. I will be chairing my first board meeting as chairman of the board, and I'll need you to prepare a detailed written summary of all pending hostile lawsuits, the ones your team assured you were minor risks, so I can begin dismantling the liabilities you've left behind. I disconnected the line before he could respond, dropping the receiver back into its cradle with a decisive click. Mark was still standing frozen by the door, his mouth slightly agape. Mark, I said, turning to him, and the professional mask snapping back into place, sharper than before. Call my chief financial officer. Tell her to hold all external communication. No press releases until after the 2 o'clock meeting. And Mark, clear my afternoon schedule completely. Except for one thing. Yes, Miss Jenkins. Find out where Mr. Sterling keeps his private collection of rare, first-edition Hemingway novels. I want them delivered to my office by 5 this evening, as a gesture of good faith. Mark blinked, bewildered by the sudden shift in tone from corporate warfare to literary acquisition. Hemingway, ma'am? Yes, I want him to know that the man who just took his entire life's work appreciates the finer things. It's called leverage, Mark. Now where are we on the integration of his personal security detail? I need the names of anyone who reported directly to his former head of security, Wallace Reed. Mark snapped back to attention, pulling out his tablet. Reed. Yes, ma'am. He's former Special Forces, highly loyal to Sterling. His file shows he managed all executive protection, including Mr. Sterling's private residence security. Why that specific detail, ma'am? I walked back to my chair, picking up the single sheet of paper that announced my victory. I smoothed out the crease Sterling's slight had created. Because, I said, my eyes narrowed, staring at the name Wallace Reed appearing on Mark's screen. When you push a man down that hard, he doesn't always get up quietly. I need to know who is guarding my new assets, and who might be planning to steal them back. Just as Mark began scrolling through Reed's contacts, my personal cell phone, the one I never used for business, buzzed violently on my desk. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, realizing this wasn't a corporate call. It was personal. No one outside a very small, very private circle knew that number. I picked it up, answering with caution. Hello? The voice on the other end was deep, utterly devoid of inflection, and terrifyingly familiar. It was Wallace Reed. Miss Jenkins, Reed's voice hissed through the speaker, cold as dry ice. Mr. Sterling didn't ignore your handshake yesterday, because he didn't respect you. He ignored it because he was too busy terrified of what you were capable of. He thought he could handle it. He was wrong. But now, you've stepped into his office and you've stepped into my territory. You think you just bought a company. You bought a battlefield. And I'm still the general of the defense. My blood ran instantly cold. This wasn't corporate maneuvering anymore. This was a threat aimed directly at my person. You have 1 hour to reverse the stock transfer, or I promise you, you will find that 80% ownership means nothing when the building is empty and you are standing alone on the sidewalk. The line went dead. The silence in my office was absolute, broken only by the sound of my own sharp intake of breath. Mark looked at me, his face white, sensing the seismic shift from boardroom strategy to immediate physical danger. "Mark," I said, my voice steady despite the frantic hammering in my chest. "That was Wallace Reed, Sterling's head of security. He just threatened me." Mark visibly flinched. "Reed? Ma'am, he's ex-Delta. He's not a white-collar threat. He's an operator." What did he say?" "He gave me 1 hour to return control of the shares or face consequences," I replied, walking back to the window. I looked down, not at the city, but at the street-level surveillance feeds Mark had displayed on the secondary monitor. I saw the black SUVs pulling up discreetly near the service entrance. Not police, but private security detail, heavily armed, moving with practiced coordination. Sterling hadn't just been playing golf yesterday. He'd been coordinating a defense. The realization hit me. Sterling didn't ignore my handshake because he was arrogant. He ignored it because he had already decided to fight dirty, and he assumed I was too naive to notice the counterattack being prepared beneath his feet. The dismissal wasn't just a slight. It was the opening shot of a war he thought he'd win before I even reached my car. "Mark, forget the press. Pull up everything we have on Reed's finances. Every offshore account, every property deed, every single dependency, his kids' tuition payments, his mother's medical bills. I want it all passed and ready to present to an international court within the hour." "But ma'am, that's aggressive even for a hostile takeover defense," Mark protested. "We have majority control. We can just call the police." "And watch Reed slip out a service tunnel while the police are busy with paperwork. No. We don't fight fire with water, Mark. We fight fire with controlled, targeted incineration. Reed is loyal to Sterling, which means he's loyal to the money Sterling promised him." I picked up my private phone again, dialing a number I hadn't used in nearly a decade. The number of an old colleague from my military intelligence days, now running a private security and intelligence firm with near limitless resources. "Alex, I need a full counter-op deployed in T-minus 30 minutes, I stated without preamble. "Target is Wallace Reed and the security team currently staging around the Sterling Corp tower. I don't want arrests. I want full incapacitation and detainment, silent, clean, and fast. I need them neutralized before they can physically interact with the building's internal systems, starting with Reed himself." Alex, ever pragmatic, chuckled darkly. "That's a jump from a boardroom dispute, Sarah. What's the collateral damage profile?" "Minimal. I own the building now. They are trespassing armed agents. Make them disappear into private holding cells until the dust settles. And Alex? Make sure Reed knows why he's being detained. Tell him it's for insulting a woman's handshake." I hung up. 30 minutes. The clock was ticking down to the 2 o'clock board meeting, and I had a security team ready to storm my own headquarters from the inside out. I stood before the panoramic window again, waiting. The tension was almost unbearable. If Reed's team moved first, they could disable my remote access, lock down the physical servers, or worse, create a chaotic scene that would instantly delegitimize my takeover in the public eye. At exactly 1:45 p.m., Mark's tablet flashed red. "Ma'am, an unauthorized network breach attempt targeting the mainframe firewall. It's Reed. He's trying to lock down the executive floor systems." "Too late, Mark. Ike, tell Alex to accelerate. Full deployment now." We watched the external feeds. It was a ballet of professional violence. 2 unmarked black vans, previously blending into the traffic, suddenly became focal points. Figures in dark tactical gear. My team moved with terrifying speed, converging on the Sterling Corp service entrances. There was no gunfire, no chaos. Just a rapid, disciplined neutralization of Reed's waiting team. Reed himself, moving toward the primary lobby entrance looking grimly determined, was met by 2 men who moved with even greater efficiency. He went down hard, silently, dragged into a waiting vehicle before he could raise an alarm. At 1:58 p.m., Mark looked up, his face showing sheer awe. "Ma'am." The network intrusion stopped dead, All external communications from the Sterling Corp building are now routed through our servers. Reed's team, they're gone. I adjusted my blazer, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from my sleeve. Good. Tell the remaining staff that Mr. Sterling has vacated his office indefinitely. Send a memo stating that all security protocols are now under my direct review. At precisely 2 p.m., the phone on my desk rang, the direct line to the boardroom. I picked it up. "Good afternoon, everyone," I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority, projecting across the room full of shocked, aging executives. "Welcome to the first official meeting of the newly restructured Sterling Corp board. I trust the transition announcements were clear. I see there are only 5 of you left. Excellent. Hey, we'll start with a motion to approve the immediate termination of all existing non-compete agreements for senior management to encourage transparency and talent retention. Who moves to approve?" One of the surviving VPs, the one who looked most terrified of Reed, cleared his throat weakly and mumbled, I move to approve, Chairman Jenkins." "Second?" I asked, looking around the silent room. The vote was unanimous. The collapse was total. I leaned back in my chair in my own office, watching the Sterling Corp tower from my window, no longer intimidated by its imposing height, but assessing it as my new asset. The initial sting of yesterday's slight, the deliberate, casual disrespect, had been the catalyst for the most comprehensive corporate takeover of the decade. Sterling had tried to use a tiny act of prejudice as a weapon, and in doing so, he had handed me the keys to his kingdom. "Mark," I called out, a genuine smile finally breaking through. "Have the Hemingway collection delivered to the CEO's penthouse suite in the Sterling Tower, and send a small, discreet courier package to Mr. Sterling's last known address. Include a simple, handwritten note." "What should the note say, ma'am?" I paused, looking down at my own hands, the hands he had refused to shake. "It should say, always accept an offered handshake. It's far more expensive to buy the whole company.